Hi, everyone, and welcome to Module 4. We're in the final stretch of the course. Over the last few weeks, we've explored learning theories, culture and identity, attention, perception, memory, and encoding. This week, we're taking the next step by looking at what happens after learning occurs. More specifically, we'll discuss why students forget, how memory is strengthened over time, and what current neuroscience tells us about learning and development. As educators, one of the most common frustrations we experience is spending time teaching something new, only to discover that learners don't remember the material a week later. The reality is that forgetting is a normal part of learning. One of the most important ideas you'll learn this week is that memory is not strengthened simply by being exposed to information. Memory is actually strengthened when students actively retrieve information from memory. That's why retrieval practice has become one of the most well-supported instructional strategies in educational research. As we move through the module, think about these guiding questions. Why do learners forget? How does retrieval strengthen learning? How does brain development influence instructional planning? We'll begin by exploring retrieval and forgetting. As you learn, forgetting isn't necessarily a sign that learning didn't occur. Instead, it provides opportunities for students to revisit, retrieve, and strengthen their understanding over time. We'll also explore the neuroscience of learning and developmental neuroscience. These topics help us better understand how learners develop cognitively, emotionally, and socially, and why instructional decisions should be responsive to where learners are developmentally. When it comes to young learners in particular, their brains are still developing, which means attention, self-regulation, decision-making, motivation, and executive functioning can look very different depending on age and developmental stage. As educators, understanding these differences helps us create learning environments that are both supportive and appropriately challenging. We'll also be introduced to dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. For many of you, this may be your first formal introduction to these learning differences. The goal is not to make any of us experts overnight, but to begin developing awareness of how learners may experience reading, writing, and mathematics difficulties. As part of this section, if you are a California K-12 educator seeking a clear credential, you'll complete the first look at the Dyslexia Standards Log activity. This activity is optional for all other Education 216 students in the summer term 3, 2026. The activity is not graded, but I do strongly encourage you to spend time with it if you are seeking your clear credential. Understanding how to recognize and support diverse learning needs is an important part of becoming an effective educator. This week, we'll also continue building our lesson plan through Lesson Plan Activity 4. At this point, we've already worked on standards, objectives, assessments, and instructional procedures. In Lesson Plan Activity 4, we'll focus on differentiation, academic language, and supports for diverse learners. As you complete this activity, I encourage you to think about how the concepts from this module influence your planning. Ask yourself, how will I support learners who need multiple opportunities to retrieve information? How will I account for differences in development and learning needs? How will I create opportunities for all learners to access and demonstrate learning? These are the kinds of questions that help transform a lesson from simply covering content to truly supporting learning. A quick reminder about this week's due dates. The Retrieval and Forgetting quiz, Neuroscience of Learning quiz, and Developmental Neuroscience quiz are all due on Thursday at 11:59 p.m. The initial post for Lesson Plan Activity 4 is due Saturday at 11:59 p.m., with peer replies due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. As always, I encourage you to start early, to pace yourself throughout the week, and reach out if you have any questions. We are almost at the end of our 5-week term, and we've already covered a tremendous amount of material. Take a moment to recognize how much you learned so far and how many connections you're beginning to make between theory, research, and practice. Keep these things in mind as we move out of the summer term and into fall, as this will set the foundation for work to come. Have a great week, and I'll see you in week 5.